something in my gut tells me either no one's going to care about this or I'm really going to regret talking about it. So, I am a bit late to this topic by a couple of weeks, actually. But the thing was, when all this initially broke, it completely just flew under my radar. I wasn't even aware. And then, after realizing what had gone on and then the reaction to what had gone on, I was like, I wonder if I should even talk about that, because I seem to be not engendering myself very well to a number of fandoms lately. And do I want to invite scrutiny from another? But then I'm like, hell with it. So Thundercats is getting a new show. It's called Thundercats Roar. And there was an announcement video showing some of the footage, including sort of looks like the opening credit sequence, a little bit of insight from behind the scenes people. And people seem to hate this thing. Like if you look at that announcement video, the downvotes on it are, holy crap. It's like, I don't even remember what it was, but it was something like 12 times what the upvotes are. That is bad. And I've seen sort of two things come out of this. I've seen a stripe of fan, Thundercats fan, I'm sure, being very upset by the look and the feel and the tone of this show. And then I've seen a response to that backlash, which I have seen it being portrayed largely as, oh, for the love of God, shut up and stop whining. And as so is often the case, I find myself falling in the middle. So allow me to attempt to mitigate and bridge the gap and probably end up ticking off both sides. We'll see. So, yeah, I mean, you can look at these images, and you can check out that announcement trailer if you haven't. If you know Thundercats at all, this is very, 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 very different. And so, nasty response, and then basically a quit whining response to that nasty response. And I'm going to sort of start with what my intended end point is going to be, assuming I don't talk myself out of it as I go, and then I'll fill in from there, so that you're not sitting around waiting for my conclusion. I do think the reaction is a little bit overblown, but I also don't think it is. I don't think a negative reaction is completely unwarranted. I do think at least some of what I have seen seems to be a little much, but yeah, I do get it. So, how to fill this in then? So let's start with just the degree of the vitriol. It is getting nasty out there. Fandom is becoming a really unpleasant place lately. Like in general, I'm not even like singling out Thundercats fans. In case you're wondering, my own relationship to Thundercats, I enjoyed Thundercats as a kid. I watched the show not religiously, but I did enjoy it. It was one of two or three of what I would have considered my favorite shows when I was younger than 10. It was basically that, He-Man and the Real Ghostbusters. I had a decent number of the toys. I enjoy Thundercats. I'm not a massive fan, though. I don't read the comics. I didn't see more than an episode of the Revive series from, I believe it was 2011. Like, I'm not a hardcore fan on this. I'm a very casual, nostalgic fan. Like, oh yeah, I remember that, sort of thing. So that's sort of my standing and where I'm at. And reboots are a strange beast. And we do, as fans, have a tendency to get overworked up about them. Especially when it comes to something that has already been rebooted more than once. Like, when it's the first time something's being rebooted, I'm not saying that shouting about it is still necessarily the best response, but I think the trepidation is a little bit more warranted in that case, because, an initial go at a reboot, if it tanks, that could be it, and you could never get another bite at the apple. Or if it succeeds but is a really poor representation of what the thing was before, then it could end up superseding the original. And if you loved the original, that can suck. That was sort of a lot of my issues going in on the 2016 Ghostbusters movie. My issue with it was the fact that it was not in continuity. It was a reboot. It was erasing the old stuff, and Sony wants a franchise desperately. They wanted to build a new franchise and basically make this new thing Ghostbusters and pretend like the old thing didn't happen, and that rubbed me the wrong way, so I get that. But I mean, at the same time, even with the reboot, that is the first reboot on something, which this isn't, for the record, but even when it is, it doesn't, only metaphorically does it erase the old stuff. And it can be frustrating, it can be infuriating, it can feel like nobody cares but you, and that's not a fun place to be, and it's easy for that to lead to anger. I think it's important to keep that in check, however. But in terms of looking at this, like this is a massive departure for Thundercats. It's not one that I think is as out of the blue as people presume, though. Because let's look back at that original Thundercats cartoon. It was a mix of sincerity and goofiness. Because, you had characters facing down some impressively realized threats, and at times the stakes feeling very genuine. But then on the other hand, you had Snarf and the Burbills, or whatever they were, and Wily Kit and Wily Cat, and the goofing around, and the always ending on a joke and a laugh, and there was a silliness to it. It was a balance of those two things. And when I point this out, the silliness, I'm not mocking it. That's part of what it was. It was part of the appeal. It was part of the fun. It's fairly standard for the time, actually. But you look at the first reboot, the 2011 reboot, and that stripped out the silly and tried to go completely serious. And regardless of whether you watched it or not, regardless of whether you liked it or not, it didn't do well, ratings-wise. It didn't do enough to keep going for very long, and they canned it. So when a license holder is looking at a property, they go, boy, this is sometimes serious, sometimes goofy. And you go in and you're like, well, we don't just want to try and literally do the same thing again, because then we might as well just revive the series, but we're never going to make anybody happy with that, because we'll either be accused of screwing up the canon, or we'll be accused of just being overly celebratory and masturbatory about the whole thing. So we are going to do a reboot, but we need to do our own flavor. So how do we shift? Well, first time we tried going completely dead serious, going all in on how serious it was. That didn't work. Heck, let's do the other side. Let's go all in on the goofy aspect and drop the more serious element. Now, that may honestly still be a bad idea, but I at least feel like I can follow the logic as to why this is being taken as an approach. And I don't think it's necessarily an invalid approach. I mean, look, there are plenty of things that I think are bad ideas, and sometimes those bad ideas actually turn out to work. I think you can try just about anything you want. You do have to sometimes think about what you're going to be in for when you do try it, and maybe decide, is it worth it for the potential wrath I'm about to invoke going this direction. I think some more places could stand to think about that sometimes. But the thing is, and here's the one other thing, because there's plenty of franchises that are rebooted over and over and over again, and sometimes when there's outcry to the reboot, like, I don't get it. Like, I don't fully get the outcry against Teen Titans Go. I understand fans of the earlier Teen Titans cartoon being annoyed that was not brought back. I understand that frustration. But Teen Titans Go is its own thing. It's not really trying to be the earlier version of Teen Titans. It is doing very much its own thing, and I think it's fine. And I feel that that's kind of what they seem to be trying for with this new Thundercats. It's not trying to be the old thing. It is trying to do something new using those elements, using those pieces. And I'll never understand when there's ever outcry against any new version of the Ninja Turtles, even when they suck, and sometimes they do. But when there's preemptive outcry, like before it's even there, like, look, I'm not sure there is anything that has been rebooted, rejiggered, and restylized as often as Ninja Turtles has. So if you don't like this version, wait 5 years, you'll have another one. It's like that one I will never get. But there is another element at play, and it's something that I don't think I've ever seen talked about or brought up in the discussion of reboots, particularly things that have been either rebooted or translated to more than one medium. Generally speaking, the original medium in which the work is presented in is considered to be the definitive medium of the work. So Ghostbusters, the 2016 Ghostbusters was not the first one to have a female Ghostbuster. I mean, setting aside the fact that Janine was allowed to be a Ghostbuster in the real Ghostbusters cartoon, there was the cartoon Extreme Ghostbusters, which had a prominent female character. But nobody cared because that's a cartoon. This is a movie franchise as far as people are concerned. And at least from my perspective, when they do something weird and wonky with comic book characters in either a television or a film adaptation, that to me is not as egregious as screwing the character up in the comics themselves, because that's their home turf. That's their medium. That's the quote-unquote real version that everything else derives from. So when we're talking Thundercats, I think that comes into play because Thundercats is a TV show first. It was actually one of the few that was existing as a pilot and was being worked on before the toy line even started. The toy line wasn't first. Although you can see how the fact that they knew they were going to have a toy line was influencing the show. So, you know, there's still a little bit of the snake eating its own tail there. But it was still a TV show first. That's what it is first and foremost. So when you present something so radical in the same medium that the work was originally presented in, I think that has a tendency to draw more ire. I think if Thundercats Roar was a webcomic or a web series, a webtoon series, there would be some people still annoyed. I don't think it would be nearly as loud as it is right now because it's being presented in the medium that is the definitive Thundercats medium. And that makes the offense, I think, feel greater for people who don't like the look of this. And I actually haven't really passed judgment on the look of this thing. And even though I've said I think it's a perfectly valid approach, I think the look is very generic at this point. It's kind of it's sort of a stock look. It's a stock Steven Universe, you know, Star versus the Forces of Evil, Adventure Time kind of look, and nothing against those, but I mean, though that aesthetic was once unique, seeing it just slapped onto an existing franchise is really weird to me and kind of off-putting. So, but that said, I mean, the speed of the jokes, the fluidity of the animation, they're putting some decent work into this, I think. At least from what little I can see. And reboots really are a fraught medium. Or a fraught kind of project to be doing. Especially when you're talking about a nostalgic property. And obviously the safer thing to do is to do something where maybe you're altering the visual look, but you're very much, and like maybe some of the pacing, bringing it up to more current standards, but you're keeping the heart of it virtually the same. I mean, that's what the DuckTales reboot is doing, and that thing is awesome. It really is. And so doing something that is much more this complete and from the ground up thing, like it is so vastly different. It almost feels like a Robot Chicken sketch. That might be a step too far, and I get why people are angry. Again, the level of anger I've seen, at least in a few places, does strike me as a bit much because, look, guys, I mean, first of all, if you don't want to watch it, don't. But if it is that bad, then it'll probably be short-lived. If it does work, honestly, that might give you a better shot at getting a version of Thundercats that you want, because it'll show that the brand is still viable, and maybe it'll revive something like the attempts to do a movie version of Thundercats that has been something that keeps cycling back up and the rights shuffle around, but nobody moves on it over and over and over again. I think because no one's certain of the viability of the property anymore. I think there's probably people waiting in the wings who would love to do a more serious take of Thundercats, but they already tried one of those and it didn't work. So this is a way to keep the license alive and viable, because otherwise it's just going to be the occasional series of comic books, which I don't even know if those are currently running right now. I expect so, probably at IDW, but I actually don't know. I should have checked that. Crap. I need to do research sometimes, but I don't like to do it. It gives me a rash. I have a note from my doctor. But, you know, comic book tie-ins to these things, they kind of keep them limping along, but they don't revitalize a flagging intellectual property, a flagging IP. A show could, and if it proves that this is a property that can still bring in interest and money, then maybe finally some of the other things could be done with it again. Or they may decide, oh, it's, you know, the goofy version is the only version, and they just double or triple down on that. Who knows? It could go any number of ways, guys, but it does not necessarily have to be a death knell, even if you don't like it. But at the same time, I'm not telling you you're wrong for being upset. I get it. I've been there myself with other franchises. So I get it, but try and keep things in perspective as best you can. That's the best that I can offer, and while recognizing I have not always been able to do that myself. So I never said I wasn't a hypocrite. So there you go, folks. My thoughts on Thundercats Roar. What are your thoughts? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's all the stuff to do, such as like and subscribe. Support me on Patreon if you like this show and you want to support it on Patreon. I should think this outro out better. You can buy t-shirts, follow me on Twitter, whatever. Links for all that stuff's down in the description. So until next time, this council is adjourned.